Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at macroeconomics.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So, like, how the experts try to figure out, what makes an entire economy work.
Yeah.
So we've got some research here about aggregate demand and supply and national income,
Okay.
and the multiplier effect,
That's
even the output gaps.
right.
And what I find interesting is how all of this stuff ties into real world events.
Yeah.
Like the UK furlough scheme that happened,
Yeah.
or the oil price shocks that we saw back in 2022.
Yeah, I think what's really important is that, we're not just defining terms.
Yeah.
We're really looking at, the implications of these terms and how they
Yeah.
translate into,
Yeah.
What you see in the daily news cycle.
Yeah.
So, understanding the multiplier effect isn't just, about knowing the formula.
Right.
It's about, debating how effective stimulus packages really are.
Yeah.
Or analyzing how spending habits across different demographics can speed up or slow down economic recovery.
Right. Yeah. It's like knowing the rules of a game.
Yeah.
And if you understand the rules, you can kind of predict what's going to happen or even influence the outcome.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump right in. When I hear aggregate demand,
Okay.
I think about, do I want to buy something?
Okay.
But how does that relate to a whole economy?
So you're on the right track.
Okay.
So like individual desire for a product
Yeah.
that falls under the realm of microeconomics.
Okay.
But macroeconomics zooms out and looks at the combined desire of everyone in the economy for everything
At a certain price point.
at a certain price point.
Got it.
We call that aggregate demand or AD.
Okay, so instead of saying, do I want that new phone?
Yeah.
It's how badly does everyone want all the things and how much are they willing to pay?
Exactly. And that willingness to pay is key.
Yeah.
Because AD is always in relation to price.
Yeah.
It's like a giant balancing act.
Okay.
And economists often visualize this relationship with what's called the AD curve.
Okay.
And it generally slopes downward.
Okay.
What that means is, as prices rise, the total quantity demanded across the economy tends to fall.
Okay. That makes sense. When prices are high, I'm less likely to buy anything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Your individual behavior reflects a larger economic reality.
Okay.
And there's three main reasons for this downward slope.
Okay.
First, there's the wealth effect.
Okay.
So when prices are high, your purchasing power decreases,
Right.
making you feel less wealthy
Yeah.
and less inclined to spend.
Makes sense.
Then there's the interest rate effect.
Okay.
Often when prices rise, interest rates follow,
Right.
making it more expensive for businesses to invest and for people to borrow money
Right.
for big purchases like houses or cars.
Yeah.
This dampens spending across the board.
Okay.
Finally, we have the net export effect. When a country's prices are high, their goods become less attractive on the international market.
Yeah.
So exports decrease and imports increase,
Right.
pulling down overall demand.
It's a chain reaction.
It is.
High prices ripple through everything.
They do.
Our sources point to the UK's response to the COVID-19 lockdowns back in 2020 as a way to kind of counteract this.
Okay.
What did they do to try and boost aggregate demand when things were looking really bad?
The UK's furlough scheme is a fascinating example of how government intervention can directly impact AD.
Okay.
By covering a portion of workers' salaries, they prevented mass unemployment,
Right.
which kept money flowing into households.
Yeah.
This allowed people to keep spending even when businesses were shut down,
Right.
preventing AD from plummeting further.
And they also lowered interest rates around the same time.
They did.
Yeah.
Reducing interest rates made borrowing more appealing,
Yeah.
encouraging businesses to invest and individuals to take out loans.
Right.
It was a two-pronged approach to stimulate spending
Right.
and trying to move that AD curve upward.
Okay, so that's a really clear illustration of how these concepts play out in real life.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about the demand side of things.
Yes.
What about aggregate supply, or AS?
Okay.
Does everyone constantly try to make as much as possible?
That's a great question.
Or are there limits?
That gets to the heart of what AS really represents.
Okay.
It's not about maximum output,
Okay.
but what firms are willing and able to produce at a given price point.
Okay.
There are lots of factors at play here.
So what determines how much a business is willing to produce at a certain price?
It depends on whether we're talking short-term or long-term.
Okay.
In the short run,
Yeah.
the relationship between price and output is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
If prices go up,
Yeah.
businesses are incentivized to produce more
Right.
because they can earn higher profits.
Right.
We represent this with the short-run aggregate supply curve, or SRES.
Okay.
And it's usually depicted as upward sloping.
Okay.
But things get a little more complex in the long run.
So in the short term,
Yes?
higher prices mean higher profits,
Uh-huh.
and everyone wants to ramp up production.
They do.
But what happens in the long run?
The long-run aggregate supply curve,
Okay.
or LRAS,
Okay.
is where you find some debate amongst economists.
Okay.
So classical economists believe that economies will always gravitate towards their full potential output,
Okay.
regardless of the price level.
Okay.
And they tend to depict the LRAS as a vertical line.
Okay.
But Keynesian economists
Right.
argue that even in the long run, government intervention can still boost an economy's output,
Interesting.
meaning the LRAS might be upward sloping.
So it's like the classic debate about,
It is.
how much the government should be involved.
Yeah.
But even with those differences,
Yes.
the things that shift the AS curve are pretty consistent, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And understanding those shifts is crucial for making sense of how events like a global oil crisis
Right.
or a sudden technological breakthrough
Yeah.
can send ripples through an entire economy.
Okay.
Let's delve into some of those shifts
Okay.
and real-world examples in more detail.
I'm ready. Let's start with what would make the AS curve shift to the right,
Okay.
meaning an increase in output.
Okay.
What are the things that might lead to that?
One of the most significant factors is production costs.
Okay.
Imagine there's a new technological breakthrough that makes it dramatically cheaper to produce a certain good.
Okay.
Suddenly, companies are willing and able to produce more of that good at every price point,
Right.
shifting the AS curve to the right.
Like when automation started being used in factories.
Exactly.
And suddenly you can make way more with less labor.
Exactly. Or let's say wages decrease for some reason,
Okay.
making it cheaper for firms to hire workers.
Uh-huh.
Again, we might see an increase in production across the board. On the other hand, an increase in production costs,
Yeah.
like what happened with oil prices in 2022,
Right.
will shift the AS curve to the left,
Okay.
leading to decreased output.
Oh, man, those oil price hikes were brutal.
They were.
Suddenly everything cost more, from like transportation
Yeah.
to basic goods.
Yeah.
And businesses either had to absorb those costs or pass them on to us,
Right.
leading to cost push inflation.
Uh-huh.
It really showed how everything's interconnected in a global economy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And it's not just oil prices.
Yeah.
Think about the supply chain disruptions that happened during the pandemic.
Right.
Those empty supermarket shelves.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
That was the AS curve shifting to the left in real time.
Oh, I still get a little anxious thinking about that.
Yeah, I know.
So anything that affects a business's ability or desire to produce,
Yes.
from wages
Uh-huh.
and raw materials
Yeah.
to government regulations
Yes.
and even technological advancement.
Can shift that AS curve.
Precisely.
Right.
And those shifts have a huge impact on our lives,
Right.
from the prices we pay to the availability of jobs.
It's crazy how much is tied into that.
It is.
But how does all of this relate to national income?
Okay.
That's another piece of the puzzle, right?
It is.
We've talked about
Yeah.
demand,
Uh-huh.
and we've talked about supply.
Yeah.
But where does the actual income part come into play?
Right.
How do we actually measure the total income of an economy?
To understand that,
Yeah.
we need to visualize how money moves between households and firms. It's like a constant flow. And economists call this the circular flow of income model.
I'm picturing a river
Okay.
with money as the water.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
So households provide their labor to firms in exchange for wages,
Yeah,
which is one source of income.
right.
Firms then use that labor to produce goods and services that they
Oh.
sell back to households.
Yeah.
This flow keeps the economy moving.
But it's not a perfectly closed loop.
Right.
There are injections
Okay.
and withdrawals
Yeah.
that can influence the amount of money in circulation.
Injections and withdrawals, what are those?
Think of them as things that either boost or reduce national income.
Okay.
The main injections are government spending.
Okay.
Things like infrastructure projects,
Right.
investment by firms,
Okay.
like building new factories
Yeah.
and exports.
Okay.
When other countries buy our goods,
Right.
these all inject more money into the economy.
So it's like adding water into our money river.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the withdrawals?
Withdrawals are things like taxes,
Okay.
savings by households,
Right.
and imports,
Okay.
which represent money flowing out of the domestic economy.
Okay, so they take water out of the river.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if people are saving more of their income,
Right.
or if a country is importing lots of goods from overseas,
Yeah.
that would decrease overall national income.
Okay. Got it. So for an economy to be in equilibrium?
Yeah.
The injections and withdrawals need to balance each other out.
Yeah.
You got it.
Okay.
Too much of one or the other and things can get out of whack.
Makes sense. But there's another fascinating concept that plays into all this.
There is?
The multiplier effect.
Yes.
Okay, I've heard about the multiplier effect,
Uh-huh.
but never fully understood what it is.
Okay.
How does it tie into this circular flow of income?
So the multiplier effect really highlights how interconnected everything is in an economy.
Okay.
It shows us how an initial injection of money,
Okay.
whether it's through government spending or investment,
Uh-huh.
can lead to a much larger final increase in GDP or national income,
Okay.
like a ripple effect,
Okay.
spreading outward from that initial splash.
So a small change can have a big impact.
You can.
This is starting to sound like economics is all about,
Yeah.
understanding those domino effects.
Yeah.
So tell me more about how this multiplier effect actually works.
Okay.
Is there some kind of formula to figure it out?
There is. And it all comes down to how much people spend versus how much they save.
Okay.
The multiplier effect is directly tied to something called the marginal propensity to consume,
Okay.
or MPC.
MPC, marginal propensity to consume.
Yes.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean exactly?
It's a measure of how much of an extra dollar or pound or euro, whatever your currency is.
Yeah.
People will spend rather than save when they receive it.
Okay.
For instance, if you suddenly got a $100 bonus
Uh-huh.
and you spent $80 of it,
Okay.
your MPC would be 0.8.
So a high MPC means people are more likely to spend that extra money rather than tucking it away in their savings.
Exactly, and that's where the multiplier effect kicks in.
Okay.
The higher the MPC,
Yeah.
the bigger that ripple effect will be
Yeah.
when there's an injection of money into the economy.
Okay.
So it's like that $80 you spent goes to someone else
Uh-huh.
who then spends a portion of it and so on.
Right.
That initial $100 ends up having a much larger impact.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see how this works.
Good.
But how do we actually calculate this multiplier effect?
There's a formula for that.
Okay.
Multiplier equals 1 divided by 1 minus MPC.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, that the MPC in a given economy is 0.8,
Okay.
just like in our bonus scenario.
Right.
Now imagine the government injects $1 billion into the economy
Okay.
through a stimulus package.
So that $1 billion is our initial pebble in the pond, so to speak.
Exactly.
What happens next?
Well, with an MPC of 0.8,
Uh-huh.
people receiving that stimulus money
Yeah.
will spend about 80% of it,
Okay.
which is $800 million.
Right.
That $800 million then becomes income for others,
Yeah.
who in turn spend 80% of their newfound income.
Okay.
And the cycle continues.
Right.
Each round of spending gets smaller
Uh-huh.
because some money is saved along the way,
Right.
but it all adds up.
So it's not just that initial $1 billion hitting the economy. It's that money circulating and creating a much larger impact than you'd expect just from that first injection. That's fascinating.
It is.
So this multiplier effect is why governments use things like stimulus packages, right?
Exactly.
Especially during economic downturns.
Exactly. By increasing government spending,
Okay.
or G in our AD equation.
Right.
During a recession, they aim to boost aggregate demand
Uh-huh.
and get the economy moving again.
Okay.
And the multiplier effect amplifies the impact of that spending.
Right.
The U.S. stimulus packages of 2009 and 2020
Yeah.
are great examples of this in action.
So in those cases, the government was basically trying to jumpstart the economy
Yes.
by dropping a big old pebble in the pond,
Uh-huh.
knowing it would create those ripple effects.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And while there's always debate about the exact size of the
Hey.
multiplier effect in real-world situations,
Yeah.
most economists agree those stimulus packages did help
Okay.
to soften the blow of those recessions.
So this multiplier effect isn't just this abstract concept.
No.
It has real-world consequences.
It does.
This makes me wonder, though,
Yeah.
if governments can just keep injecting money to boost growth,
Uh-huh.
why don't they do it all the time?
That's where things get a bit more complex.
Okay.
There are potential downsides
Right.
to constant stimulus.
Okay.
It's not a magic bullet.
Right.
For example,
Yeah.
if aggregate demand grows too quickly
Uh-huh.
and outpaces aggregate supply,
Yeah.
it can lead to inflation.
Right. I remember that classic example of hyperinflation,
Yes.
where prices just skyrocket.
Exactly.
Because there's too much money chasing too few goods.
Yes.
So there's a delicate balance to strike.
There is.
But I love how this all ties back to individual choices.
Yes.
Like your spending habits actually contribute to this multiplier effect.
Absolutely. If you received an unexpected bonus,
Yeah.
would you spend most of it
Uh-huh.
or would you save it?
Right.
Your individual MPC plays a role in the overall dynamics of the economy.
I'll never look at my spending the same way again.
I know, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've talked about AD,
Hi.
AS national income, the multiplier effect.
Right.
What else should we explore on our macroeconomic adventure?
Let's talk about output gaps.
Okay.
They're a way to measure how well an economy is performing
Okay.
compared to its potential.
Output gaps. Sounds a bit like something out of Star Trek.
Okay.
Are these some kind of economic anomaly?
Not quite.
Okay.
An output gap simply measures the difference
Yeah.
between an economy's actual GDP
Oh, yeah.
and its potential GDP.
So potential GDP is like the best case scenario.
Exactly.
The maximum output,
Yes.
if everything was firing on all cylinders.
It represents the full capacity of an economy.
Right.
If all resources were fully utilized.
Okay.
The output gap tells us whether an economy is overperforming or underperforming
Gotcha.
compared to that ideal scenario.
So if there's a gap between the real output and that ideal output,
Yes.
we can see how much we're either exceeding
Exactly.
or falling short of our economic potential.
Precisely. And there are two types of output gaps,
Okay.
positive and negative.
Okay, let's break those down. What's a positive output gap?
Okay.
Does that mean things are going really well?
A positive output gap occurs when the actual GDP
Yeah.
is higher than the potential GDP.
Okay.
It can be a sign that things are heating up, maybe even too much.
Okay.
It often leads to inflationary pressure
Right.
because demand is outstripping the economy's ability to produce.
Okay.
Imagine a car engine overheating because it's being pushed too hard.
I can picture that. So it's like those economic booms
Yes.
where everyone is spending like crazy and businesses are struggling to keep up.
Yes.
Didn't our sources mention the UK economy in 2007, right before the financial crisis, as an example of this?
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
There was so much demand that it pushed prices up
Yeah.
and created unsustainable growth.
Right.
But then, of course, that bubble
Yeah.
burst,
Yeah, leading to
a negative output gap.
a negative output gap. So that's when things aren't going so well.
Exactly. A negative output gap happens when actual GDP falls short of potential GDP.
Okay.
This indicates that the economy is underperforming,
Right.
often resulting in high unemployment and recessionary conditions.
Yeah.
Think of it like a car sputtering because it's not getting enough fuel.
Okay, so a positive output gap is like the economy overheating, and a negative output gap is like the economy stalling out.
Yeah,
The UK's 2008-2009 recession is a classic example
it is.
of that negative output gap.
Right. The economy contracted sharply,
Yeah.
leaving many resources underutilized.
Right. So you can see how these output gaps are like economic warning signs.
Yes.
Giving us clues about the overall health of an economy.
Exactly.
So a positive output gap might mean we need to watch out for inflation, while a negative output gap suggests we might be headed for a recession.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And understanding these output gaps
Yeah.
helps policymakers make decisions
Okay.
about how to try to stabilize the economy
Right.
using tools like fiscal and monetary policy.
Right, like adjusting government spending or interest rates
Yes.
to try to nudge things in the right direction. I love how all these pieces fit together.
Me too.
Like we're putting together a giant economic puzzle.
It is like a puzzle.
We can even visualize these output gaps
Yes.
using the ADS model we discussed earlier.
You can?
A positive output gap would be represented by the AD curve shifting to the right, pushing actual GDP beyond the LRAS,
Yes.
while a negative output gap would be the opposite,
Yes.
AD shifting to the left with actual GDP falling short of the LRAS.
Precisely.
It all comes full circle. This is so much more insightful
It is,
than
really.
just reading a textbook definition.
I agree.
But I want to bring it back to our listeners for a moment. Why should they care about these big picture concepts?
That's a fantastic question.
How do they affect their everyday lives?
Understanding macroeconomics isn't just for policymakers or academics.
Right.
It's crucial for making informed decisions about your personal finances,
Okay.
your career choices, and even how you vote.
Okay, now we're talking. Give me some real-world examples
Okay.
of how these concepts play out in people's lives.
Let's say you're thinking about buying a house
Mm-hmm.
or taking out a loan.
Okay.
Understanding how interest rates are influenced by things like inflation and economic growth
Right.
can help you make a smarter financial decision.
Like knowing whether to lock in a fixed interest rate
Exactly.
or go with a variable one.
Exactly. And if you're thinking about changing careers,
Yeah.
knowing which industries are likely to grow or shrink in the coming years can be incredibly valuable.
Right.
Macroeconomics can give you insights into those broader trends.
So it's not just about the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
It's about making better choices based on a deeper understanding of those underlying forces.
You've got macroeconomics
Yeah.
helps us connect the dots
Yeah.
between individual choices and larger economic outcomes.
This has been so eye-opening.
It is a fascinating field.
We've explored how aggregate demand and supply interact, how money flows through the economy,
Yes.
and how the multiplier effect can amplify those effects.
Right.
We even learned how to use output gaps to get a sense of an economy's overall health. And I bet our listeners are feeling a lot more confident
I hope so.
in their ability to understand what's happening in the world around them.
Yeah.
So I want to leave them with a final thought.
Okay.
We've seen that macroeconomic forces are constantly at play.
They are.
How can you apply these concepts to your own financial decisions?
Right.
Or to understanding what's happening in the current economic climate?
That's a great question for our listeners to ponder.
It is. It's all about staying curious
Yes.
and connecting those dots.
So.
And that wraps up another deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of macroeconomics. Remember, stay curious. Keep learning.
Yes.
And we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Yeah, it really is empowering to kind of see how these complex economic forces, play out in our daily lives.
It's like we've unlocked a secret code to understanding the news headlines.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about those times when economists disagree.
Okay.
You mentioned those differing views on the long-run aggregate supply curve.
Yeah.
How can we, as non-experts, navigate all those differing opinions?
That's a great question. I think that's where critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
So, when you hear economists debating different approaches, like whether the government should intervene in the market or let things play out naturally, pay attention to their underlying assumptions.
Okay.
Are they focusing on short-term effects or long-term effects?
Okay.
Are they prioritizing inflation control or unemployment reduction?
Yeah.
Or something else entirely?
Right.
Understanding those priorities can really help you make sense of their recommendations.
So it's not about blindly trusting one expert or another.
No.
It's about evaluating their perspective based on, their goals and assumptions.
Precisely.
It's like understanding the context of a story.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge the experts.
Okay.
Ask yourself, does this theory align with what I'm seeing in the real world?
Yeah.
Are there alternative explanations they haven't considered?
Right.
Engaging in that kind of critical thinking helps you develop your own informed perspective on economic matters.
I love that. So it's like we're not just passively absorbing information.
Right.
We're actively questioning and analyzing it.
You got it.
It reminds me of something you touched on earlier.
Okay.
The idea that our individual choices, like our spending habits, actually contribute to the overall economy.
It is powerful.
It's like, wow, that's amazing.
Every time you decide to spend or save, you're participating in this complex system.
Yeah.
Think about it. Your decision to take out a loan or invest in the stock market is influenced by your understanding of macroeconomic factors.
Right.
Like interest rates and economic growth.
Right. And all those decisions multiplied across, millions of people.
Millions of people.
Collectively shape the direction of the economy.
Yes.
It's like we're all tiny brushstrokes contributing to a giant economic canvas.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
That's kind of cool.
And it highlights why understanding macroeconomics is so important for everyone, not just the experts.
Right.
It gives you a framework for making sense of the world around you and for participating in the economic conversations that shape our lives.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible. We started with these seemingly abstract concepts like aggregate demand and supply.
Right.
But we can see how they translate into real-world decisions.
Yes.
Government policies, even our own personal financial choices.
Absolutely.
We've explored how those seemingly small changes in spending can create ripple effects through the multiplier.
Yes.
How output gaps signal, economic booms or busts.
Yeah.
And how understanding the flow of money through the economy can help empower us to make informed decisions.
It's amazing how much is connected.
I think our listeners are walking away with a newfound appreciation for the power of macroeconomic forces.
I hope so.
And the tools to navigate, the complexity of the economic landscape.
It's a powerful thing to have.
It is. And that wraps up another deep dive.
It does.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of macroeconomics.
Yes.
Remember, stay curious, keep learning.
Please do.
And we'll catch you on the next deep dive.